I would like to welcome Dr. Gordon Neufeld to this interview. We are very pleased to have you here today. I would like to introduce you shortly. You have written together with Gaborjem Matéjem a book, Hold On to Your Kids, which has been translated to more than 25 languages now. And we are very happy to have it translated now into Slovenian. Dr. Neufeld is a clinical and developmental psychologist and founder of the Neufeld Institute based in Canada. He's also an international speaker and a foremost authority on child development. We are honored to have been given the chance to work on this book, me as a translator and Maya and Nushka as collaborators. This book has profoundly affected our parenting and our work. And while we were preparing for this interview, we discussed how it's changed our lives after reading it. And we all agreed that it has helped us to see our kids in a different way, from the inside out, that we need to trust into intuition when we parent them. And most importantly, that we need to hold on to them. And so before we dive into the book, can you tell us something about yourself? You know, we know you have a big family and a very rich professional path as a psychologist. However, you mentioned in some places that your major in graduate school was not psychology. How did you become involved in psychology and child-parent relations in particular?
It's a great question, and thank you for inviting me to this interview. It's my pleasure to be here. It's good to meet you, and it's wonderful. I have the sense that the book is in very good hands. So thank you. It's wonderful actually to be interviewed by individuals that have children. When I first published this book and I was doing my book tour, I would one journalist after another journalist and so on, I would say, do you have any children? No. You know, well, there is something that you bring to it when you have children. It just the questions you have are much different. So thank you. Well, yes, to your question, I was actually headed for medical school. So my studies were in the natural sciences, physics, biology, chemistry. And it was after I'd been accepted into medical school that I had second thoughts. I really had decided on my course, I think, when I was 4 or 5 years of age, because I had an uncle who was a physician, and I just assumed this was a great thing to do. And so when I had been accepted into medical school and got into the school of my dreams, I thought, well, what is it that I'm really curious about? What is it that I want to know about? And I realized that what I really wanted to do is make sense of people from inside out. So I thought, well, psychology was more like what I wanted to do. And so I switched to psychology for my master's and my doctoral programs. And then when I had children, of course, I realized that I didn't understand them at all, and what I really wanted to do is make sense of kids. And the material that I was exposed to in graduate school was rather useless in this regard. That's when I shifted to the developmental approach. I started to familiarize myself with attachment theory. And of course, that changed everything for me. Once I was there, I was hooked. And so that's my mission has been to make sense of kids ever since then. And I believe that if you can make sense of kids, the rest actually comes easy. You have to make sense of kids first of all, because before you can really figure out what makes adults tick, because we're really all just big kids, or kids with adult bodies. So it's making sense of kids is where I landed on and stayed.
Well, can you tell us then how the book came to be and what led you to collaborate, you and Gaborjem Matéjem to collaborate on the book?
Well, I had met Gabor as a student in one of my parenting courses. And he also came to me for some guidance as a parent of 3 children. He actually talks about that when he, that experience. And he absolutely loved the material, and he found he couldn't write his own books without talking about it. At first, I was rather frustrated with him, as I wanted to be the one who walked out the material, the first one out of the gate, so to speak, with it. My problem is that I hated writing so much so that in school I had avoided every writing assignment possible. It's probably why I went into the sciences, not only because of curiosity, but because I could avoid writing. So here I was successfully having avoided writing, and now I had something to write about. And I'm also very slow at writing. I don't think in words, I think in images. And so writing is, people ask me, well, is English your first language? Unfortunately, no. Images are my first language. English is my second, and I struggle with English. And so it feels like I never have the words I need to describe what I see in my head. Gabor is very quick with words. He thinks in words. He lives in words, so he has. I would complain of only having 12 crayons in my box, and he had 48 crayons in his box. So I was frustrated with him, and we had some talks. I asked him. He was very deferent, and I said, like, look, I can't keep this under lid. This is too good. It's got to be out there. So, what are you going to do about it? So our wives decided, his wife and my wife, they got together and they decided, instead of squaring off with each other, that we should actually cooperate. It ended up to be a brilliant idea, actually. With the pressure off to write for the public, I wrote the original manuscript, about twice as long as what it ended to be. And then after I finished writing, that was the idea, that Gabor would rewrite it in a more literary style.
What do you mean by this? We need to hold on to our kids.
Well, your problem wasn't unique. The title was a problem in every single other language. As hold on, the construct of hold on only seems to work as an analogy in English. In every other language, it's taken too literally. And so it has the idea of grasping or keeping back or something like this, rather than the analogy of preserving a sense of connection. And so preserving a sense of togetherness, of it being the responsibility of the parent to be able to do this. It was quite ironic for me, because I started my career as a very strong developmentalist, but I had not yet properly understood attachment. So I was like many other individuation trained therapists who saw that the issue of parenting was to let go of your children. So I would give lectures on letting go and so on. And then when I realized the fact that the analogy should be more like a plant, that when the rootedness is there, and you can never be too rooted as a plant. You can't ever be too attached as a plant. It was all the individuation grew from that. The problem is that when individuals were just trained in the developmental approach and individuation theory, many times with Carl Jung being the inspiration of this, they came to the conclusion that attachment was the enemy. Now, that's not ever what Carl Jung said, but many of the followers came to the conclusion, and they used words like fusion, enmeshment, codependence, and the construct of attachment was suffocating. And so I was trying to confront that idea. And also it was a 180-degree polar opposite of how I started off with in my career, because when you put attachment at the front end of development, when it's attachment-based developmental approach, again, you see it like a plant. You can never be too rooted. The deeper the roots are, the more the fruit of that comes. This is a mistake still being made by most experts today, the thinking that children, and especially adolescents, need to separate from their parents to become themselves, when in actual fact, all of the evidence points to the opposite, the direct opposite, that adults still need to be deeply attached to caring adults in order to realize their potential as separate beings. And despite the fact that the research is unequivocal in this conceptual rut still exists in our society. So it was meant to be provocative, hold on to your kids, but not quite as provocative as the title is in other languages. It was just meant to be kind of a, okay, you got to look at this, everybody's telling you to let go and somebody's telling you to hold on. So what does it mean?
So if we turn to peer orientation, which is one of the main themes in your book. So the book was written 17 years ago, but it seems to me that the concept of peer orientation is still not widely known. I mean, basically, you're the only one talking about it, as far as I know. People are more concerned with getting children to interact with their peers, to get them into nurseries, kindergartens, preschools as soon as possible, saying children need to socialize and so on. And for those who are watching this and have not yet read the book, can you explain what peer orientation is? And where is the place for peers then in children's lives? And what is their role? And why would you think peer orientation is not more widely known?
I'll try to be precise. Of course, that's why I wrote the whole book.
Okay.
That is because it was very, very difficult to take a phenomena that is not at all recognized and to be able to explain it. And so you have to do a lot of filling in. You have to do a lot of the science behind it, of what attachment is about and what children need. So it's very difficult to do so. And you're right. I actually was, once Gabor consented to help me write it, I was in a bit of a hurry because I thought, oh my goodness, this phenomena is so significant. It's changing the very face of culture today and of the dynamics today. And it inevitably led to the digital revolution or the information age becoming the social media age. It was driven by peer orientation, that everybody would be writing about it. And so it is, to my surprise, that 17 years later, it is still the only book on the topic. Now, language plays a huge part in consciousness. We know that. If we don't have a term for something, I talk about counterwill in the book, and because there's not a name for that in languages, we're blind to it, so as soon as we have a label for something, it becomes self-evident. That is the feedback I think I've got most from the book. Is oh my goodness! As soon as that word the term began to unfold for me, I saw peer orientation everywhere. I've lived in the midst of it and didn't see it. So I had hoped that I had hoped that the book would make a dent in this consciousness, and maybe it's made a dent, or a dent into it, and not very much. So the problem is still eclipsed. I'll never forget the response from the British presses when the foreign rights agent was trying to sell the book to UK publishers, and they said, "Oh, that's not a problem here. We don't have any problem in pure orientation. That's only a problem you have in North America." Well, actually, it's a lot worse in the UK than it is in Canada, for that matter. But that was a problem. Now, what role does peer interaction play in healthy development? It certainly plays a part, but not nearly as much as is commonly assumed to be the case. What should be the priority, what children need, is their attachments to caring adults. And what children need is to develop a sense of self that's strong enough to hold on to themselves when they are interacting with peers. And that takes time. That takes time. So the problem with premature peer interaction is that it can easily sabotage what a child truly needs. So do they need peer interaction? The answer would be no. No, they don't need it. Will it help? Yes, when the child is ready. What they do need, and again, this is unequivocal, what they do need is strong attachments, deep attachments to caring adults. What they do need is a sense of self that's strong enough to survive peer interaction. So the question should really be turned around. We should be asking ourselves, how much peer interaction can we afford in order to not sabotage what a child truly needs? And when we ask that, then we find our way through this. We find our balance. And it takes a lot, actually, of healthy development before peer interaction can actually benefit a child. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the great inspirer of the developmental approach, thought that children shouldn't be allowed peer interaction before they hit puberty. Well, he overstated his case, but at least he was going in the right direction. He was asking the question in the right way. And that's what I am trying to get parents to do, to ask the question in the right way. Like what are the irreducible needs of a child, and how do we calibrate the peer interaction accordingly?
You were mentioning that once we have the term, you can see then the phenomena. But what I find it really amazing is that basically you could put your finger on this phenomena, and not just coining the term, but seeing this as something that's problematic, actually. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Well, it was a very interesting experience for me. I didn't start out writing about peer orientation at all. I felt very much like, and I think I have this somewhere in the book, I felt very much like if I was writing about astronomy, and I was gazing into the heavens, so to speak, and suddenly I realized there was an asteroid heading towards Earth, and there was something that was going to alter the course of civilization. And that's how I felt. I felt like, oh my goodness, if this is what children need, what is happening nowadays? And so it was being struck with a sense of a bit of an urgency around it. Now, it can be dismissed as alarmist until you actually see the phenomena and realize how much it has already changed civilization and how much it prepared the way for the digital revolution to become preoccupied with the social aspects, with the quest for togetherness. And that was driven by peer orientation.
You mentioned once that you have noticed how peer orientation started after the World War II, and that before that, the culture and rituals that were in place helped raise children. Still, we can not sometimes get rid of the feeling of this being a slight idealization of these good old times. So, for example, in poorer societies, children were sent to factories or farms at very early age to work and help sustain the families. And parents did not pay much attention to their kids. There were a lot of physical punishment. And what would be your comment on that?
Well, I think that would be an unwarranted generalization, because I was speaking actually to one factor only, and that was that in times past, children's attachments to the adults who care for them was not as endangered as it is now, and also the child's village of attachment was greater. But of course, the attachments provide the power that can be abused. And so was it abused? Yes. It was. It doesn't mean it was used in an enlightened way, in a way that served children. But so I was actually speaking to that. It's more like saying that food was less toxic in the past. Like that doesn't idealize the past. It just says that, yes, this is a new problem. In peer orientation did not exist in hunter-gatherer tribes. It did not exist among nomads. If we look in the evolution, it was all hierarchically arranged. because society is arranged to take care of each other. And so you get very benevolent societies like Bali, for instance. In Bali, you get this incredible benevolent society that is very hierarchically arranged. And so you would expect from sometimes for hierarchy to lead to the abuse of power. And yet the idea of a leader there is to serve the people. And the more you are in charge, the more you provide the conditions. And so Margaret Mead, when she did her anthropological research in the 1940s, saw the Balinese children as being this incredibly open, completely different than other children. And so were they aware of what they were doing? No, this was just their culture and their tradition. But the relationships of children to the adults who cared for them are very strong. So it simply sets the stage, which can either be abused or used correctly. But the issue is not first of all, children need to have strong relationships with the adults who care for them. And then secondly, parents better use this properly, because we've got dreadful examples of past cultures in which this was used to the detriment of children, not to their realizing their potential. So I didn't have the sense that I was idealizing it at all. I was just speaking to this one factor.
What would you say was it the problem that the culture somehow, because of this neoliberalism and capitalism and materialism, that kind of eroded the culture, and then pure orientation came to be? Or was it maybe the other way around? Or what would you presume is the cause for pure orientation? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. I try to tackle this in the book. It's a difficult question. No, when we look at the first understanding of attachment, Aristotle, as far as we understand, was the first one who actually came out and said, the quest for togetherness is the predominant need of humans. But where was Aristotle coming from? Well, as one of the ancient Greek philosophers, he loved to hang out with his peers. And he was actually speaking in a male-dominated world about the fact that us, philosophers, we like to hang out with each other. And so he was saying that social needs predominate all other needs. Well, this idea of social has this whole connotation that is with one's colleagues. Well, these theories were all, in a sense, made by men primarily about their interactions with each other, and it created a huge blind spot. The word social was used, which connotates peers, and that's why, in many ways, the correction to this with Bowlby, who was often perceived to be the father of attachment theory. He's not. Aristotle is, but he is the father of the word attachment, and the concept of attachment to replace social meant that now we were free to talk about the hierarchical nature, because it is meant to take care of each other. That's its evolutionary purpose, that is the way nature takes care of us, all mammals, for example, is by our quest for togetherness, because in togetherness our probability for survival increases. So it's about the caring. I think that we were starting from the wrong place. We were starting from adults, and we were specifically starting from peer-oriented adults. And we visited all our theories upon children and created this huge blind spot. And to this day, when we think they need to socialize, they need to be social, the social needs are greater, when in actual fact, their attachment needs, which is different than social with peers, their attachment needs predominate and are much more important. But it's a complex question.
Yeah, I know.
And I think there are many factors, and I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm a psychologist, and so I try to put these pieces together, but I'm out of my wheelhouse, so to speak. So I'm guessing. The issue is in the individual case. Peer orientation often happens because we don't realize as parents how important it is to preserve their relationships with us. And so in an individual case, it comes more because of ignorance and in some cases neglect, and in some cases preoccupation, as you say, with materialism, with our job, with our profession, with our preoccupation. So individually, it is easier to track than it is as a culture.
You introduce a lot of new perspectives and concepts into parenting, but it seems that the prevailing theme is that relationship with the child is sacred. And if I may quote from your, tell a quote from your book, "Parenthood is above all a relationship, not a skill to be acquired. Attachment is not a behavior to be learned, but a connection to be sought." So bringing the relationship into the spotlight is contrary to prevailing focus now on shaping behavior and these practices, how to make the child behave and all these strategies and techniques. So what happens if we don't make the relationship a priority?
Well, yes, that is the underlying theme of the book, and I'm glad that that's obvious. And yes, it is contrary to the prevailing focus today, and hence the book, because it's going against the grain in this way. If we don't make the relationship a priority, we put in jeopardy the very foundations of healthy development, or that healthy development is built upon. It is everything. It really is everything. It's the womb in which a child grows, if you use that. It's the attachment roots in which all maturation results from. The escalating problems that children are presenting don't come from just nowhere. And, almost all problem behavior can be faced to tracing more separation than a child could bear. And this evokes powerful emotions of frustration, alarm with intensified pursuit that in turn can drive the troubling behavior and the symptoms that concern us. Now, the symptoms of children are typically behavioral, and that grabs our attention. And so what this book is calling for is to see past it, to see past to where it comes from. And of course, that, as you gathered, the symptoms that children present with are behavioral, but the solution is almost always relational. And so it is, even if it has had nothing to do with it. I've had parents who come to me with adolescents who say, well, how do I help my child to get over an addiction? Well, I say, well, that depends on how much your child is attached to you. Because if your adolescent is not attached to you, you don't have any power to work within. You might say, don't do this. You might say, don't do that. But you need a lot of power to work with an addiction. You need to bring them on side. You need to be able to get their trust. There's a lot of things you need. So the relationship always comes first. It's always at the basis. It provides the context for us to deal with what it is that we are meant to deal with. We just were never meant to parent cold. We were never meant to teach cold. We weren't meant to be able to deal with adolescents whose hearts we do not have. And so we must have their hearts to be able to execute our responsibilities as parents. So yes, if anything is sacred in parenting, it is a relationship of children to their parents. And if there is what is most important for the parent is to not do things that would jeopardize that relationship, to be able to, again, hold on to their kids in the sense of preserve the connection, to make that the priority in their interaction.
Okay, so here I cannot help to think also about the teachers.
Yes, absolutely.
Can a
Yes,
teacher teach without a child having child's heart or child being attached to the teacher?
It's a very same thing with teaching, is that it's not so much what a teacher does. It's not the pedagogy, it's not the technology, it's not the curriculum, it's who the teacher is to the child that counts the most. And that's easy to see when we look at our own history of education, is the teachers we were most attached to, developed a little bit of a relationship, a liking to, and so on, will have had a lot more influence in our life. So yes, as I say, I think I say in the book, we as teachers, we need to win the hearts of the students to get access to their minds. And so the same thing applies for teaching as well.
I will jump into another big concept that you talk about, and that is the concept of maturation. I really like your saying that everybody grows up, but they don't necessarily mature, which is actually the ultimate goal of development. So it actually seems, if we look at the things as they are, that the emphasis is more on growing up, on becoming independent, than on the maturation itself. And you say that maturation takes time and patience.
Yes.
Can you speak more to this?
Yes, this is the very essence of the developmental approach, that there exists these inner springs, so to speak, that of instinct and emotion, that move us if conditions are conducive to realize our potential, that actually are responsible for our maturation. And so the construct of maturation is not a popular construct today. It's more an age and stage theory of development, that if you are a certain age, the actual phrase in the English language is that everybody grows older. You can't help it. Not everybody grows up in the sense of maturation. And so the idea that with age comes certain capacities rather than the spontaneous development when conditions are conducive. So this is the heart of again, the developmental aspect of it. When learning theory became the predominant paradigm of the day, and many people don't even know the primary assumptions of it and the history of learning theory, because we live inside of this paradigm. And when learning theory became the prominent paradigm, as it is now, the inner springs of behavior were ignored and eclipsed. It was thought that we could shape behavior by altering the outcomes, by rewarding, or by aversive consequences, and so on. We could shape behavior and ignore the underlying emotions and instincts. Well, neuroscience has destroyed, totally debunked that understanding of the brain. A theory that was in existence when learning theory started in 17th century Britain, John Locke's tabula rasa, it was considered the enlightened alternative to two other theories: preformation theory, in which the personality is preformed, and the inner springs theory. And that inner springs theory, that most behavior springs from instinct and emotion, started with the ancient Greeks. But neuroscience has brought us full circle and said that was the theory. That was how the brain is. It's full of inner springs of movement, pre-wired to move us in certain ways. Emotions have a purpose, instincts have a purpose. And so this is hugely important, because it means that there are natural processes, natural life forces within us, that if conditions are conducive, the child will automatically want to be themselves, to be independent, do it myself, that there is this quest for independence. Now, if you don't believe in this process, if you're from learning theory, you believe you have to shape independence. So the idea from there, and it was formalized in the 1960s in Britain especially, is don't do anything for a child that they could or should do for themselves. And so you might give the room for dependence for a year, but after that you train independence, because if you give dependence an inch, it will take a mile. They'll never grow up. Well, that was the ultimate idea of learning theory. And again, many people are still stuck in those conceptual ruts. The actual fact is that if you provide for a child's dependency needs, if you invite generously a child to be able to lean upon you, assume the responsibility to be the answer to their attachment needs, it automatically, they become preoccupied with being separate individuals, doing things themselves. So independence, it turns out, cannot be trained. Now, the problem with peer orientation is that when children become peer oriented, they are less dependent upon parents. And so experts and parents and teachers think this is progress. But it's not progress. They are just more dependent upon their peers. And when you're dependent upon your peers, it sets a stage for dreadful things to happen. There's no maturity going on there at all. The conditions aren't. So it's what happened is that there was a lack of trust in children being in something good happening within children, in the developmental process that was spontaneous. And we've had 400 years of cynicism now, that children are evil little critters that are hell-bent on destruction. You mustn't let them get away with anything. You've got to get on top of things and so on. And it's about time we revise our thinking, because this isn't getting us anywhere. It never did get us anywhere. And so from a developmental point of view, you believe, again, the ultimate belief is that when conditions are conducive, a child comes to realize their full potential as a human being, and that includes separateness and independence. So that's the fruit, not the aim. The role of the parent is to play midwife to this process by taking care of the dependency needs and not being afraid of this. That's a long-winded answer, I know, but I mean, this is a rant of a developmentalist, right? This is the rant because it's like, come on, you guys, get you know,
wake
like it's
up,
time,
right?
yeah, wake up.
Wake up. Yeah.
Because this is not this is just a neuroscience. When we got a picture of the brain, the Greeks had guessed. And so we have to go full circle to 25,000 or 2,500 years ago to say, oh my goodness, did we take a wrong turn in 17th century England with the tabula rasa, the blank slate theory, and learning theory is not a viable paradigm.
And it is really so ingrained in almost every aspect of education, child raising, even workplace culture and everything.
So ingrained. It's a conceptual
really so
rut that is so deep. It is so deep that, like just in my classes at university, I would have the students would be taking notes, and I said, put down your pens. This is before computers were there, taking notes. I'm confronting a way of thinking. You've got to think of this differently. If you don't think of it this differently, the application will never make sense. So it's actually, like there is a process where you go, yes, I can trust in the inherent goodness in the child and the inherent, desire to be good for those attached to. I can trust in the developmental process. So there's a trust factor that goes into this.
Yes, and you speak a lot in your book. So when children are immature, they act accordingly. And usually their bad behavior is seen as something unacceptable or something to be punished or consequences. So something that we should unlearn them. So how do you see this bad behavior and what can their behavior tell us?
Well, the key is not to see bad behavior. The key is to see beyond the bad behavior. You know, this is an insight approach. And the insight is to see beyond. And so you see into the inner springs of behavior. Now, when a parent sees an eruption of attacking energy, aggressive behavior, when a parent can see beyond the aggression, the rudeness, the unacceptability to the underlying frustration from where it came, it changes everything. You know, then the parent can say, oh my goodness, I see you're upset, you're frustrated, that frustration needs to come out. Here, let me help you find a way that doesn't harm your sister or that obeys the rules. And so you've got something to start off with, but you start off with insight. It brings you to the child's side. It's no longer an adversarial approach. You find your way to the child's side. Now you can actually give shape to the inner spring that is giving you trouble. You know, if you have an alpha instinct that is out of place, the child is always having to have the last word, get on top of the situation, put others down. When you know the inner springs to behavior, you can give it some place. Now, you know, that's a wonderful, wonderful instinct that you need to be in charge. Can you help me right now feed your brother? Can you be in charge of that? And so you put it in its place in a caring way. But we've learned from our animals, nobody calls it bad behavior anymore. If you're a horse trainer or a dog, whisperer, you don't use those terms. What you see is that everything, if the dog is barking, you figure out what's the inner spring of this behavior. Sometimes all you have to say is thank you to the dog because they're trying to protect you and the dog stops barking. We're better with our pets than we are with our children. And the idea is not to see bad behavior, but to see beyond the problem behavior to the inner springs from which it comes. And of course, children trip over their immaturity. They can't help being impulsive. They're driven by the emotions and instincts that were meant to take care of them, until they get to their mixed feelings. So it takes a while. We do have to impose some order on them, of course, especially in our society that is tight, it's complex, it's contrived, and we're crowded. So we have the responsibility as parents to impose some order on their behavior so we can shoehorn them into the society that they find themselves in. Well, we don't get it through labeling a behavior bad or by seeing it as bad. We get there by trying to find a place for these instincts and emotions and a way of expressing them that don't get them into trouble. So we start from a different place.
Can I ask something else here? So basically your approach is more there are no punishments, there are no consequences except in certain specific circumstances, for example, like you say, in social contexts. But anyway, it's a more caring and more considerate approach to kids. So when you see past the behavior, you can address the frustration, as you say, or alarm or anything that's there. And that makes you more kinder and more, I don't know, maybe I know sometimes I get the reaction from people who they seem that I'm permissive, that I'm allowing this kind of behavior to continue because I don't punish, I don't scream, I don't, most of the time at least, but I don't impose consequences, timeouts, etc. What would be your comment on, how to, would you say this is a permissive parenting, or in what way it's different from permissive parenting?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, you can be a very strict parent and still put the relationship as a priority. And so it's, and you can use consequences and still put the relationship as a priority. Punishment one should reserve for when one has to serve social justice. It's more like in the sports. If you don't give a penalty, if you don't punish a violator, then other children take it into their own hands. And so there is a place for this. But it shouldn't be routine, because this is not how it's. There should be a different way of doing this. The problem with consequences is more if it's used routinely. Life is consequences. That is what it is. But if we use what children care about against them, we're using what they're attached to against them. First of all, we harm the relationship, and as a routine, we have to do that sometimes as responsible parents. No, I've got to take that away from you. I've got to do this. We've got to do this. But if we use it as a characteristic, let me see what you're attached to, what you care about, so that I can use that as power to manipulate your behavior. Well, that's not a good relationship. It doesn't convey trust in the child, and it courts defenses against caring. But it's for parents who are concerned. You mean we can't use consequences at all? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you can trust that if the relationship is good, there will be an inherent desire of the child to be good for you. And you can, this is huge. This is a huge dynamic in this. If a child wants to be good for you, oh my goodness, then you can get on the same side of the problem. You can work with it. There are ways that you do this, but that relationship should be preeminent. I think this appears like permissive parenting to many, because for those who do not trust in the power of relationship, or in the inherent nature of a child to be good for those who are attached to, or in the spontaneous unfolding of the potential of human potential, if conditions are conducive, then if they don't trust in this, they think you're letting a child get away with something. They think you've gone soft on them. You think they're being irresponsible, so they think you're being permissive. No, that's not true. But cynics who don't believe that you can trust in these processes, they naturally think you've got to be on top of everything. You mustn't let them get away with it. And it's very hard to be able to make somebody trust who doesn't. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to do so. And so this becomes a problem. But this approach is very different. It differs from most permissive parenting in that it asks parents to be in charge. And most permissive parenting, children get to take the lead. Mm-hmm. And this is not this way. In this parenting, it asks parents to be in charge, to take the lead, to differentiate between what a child demands. I want to play with my friends, and what they need. You need to be at home. What they demand and what they need. It calls for parents to step up, to be the answer to their children, to assume responsibility for the work of the relationship, hence hold on to your kids, and to not let anything divide, not letting behavior get in the way. This is very hard work indeed. This is not permissive or laissez-faire parenting by any means. This calls for us to grow up. This really calls for us to grow up as parents and to assume responsibility. So I think it's misinterpreted this way. If you've been child-led in the past, this confronts you in being child-led. If you haven't trusted in children's inherent nature to be good for those to whom you're attached, this confronts you. But again, it's very hard to make somebody trust who really doesn't. And so this will always be a criticism. If you believe in children, if you believe in the spontaneous unfolding of nature, this will seem, or if you don't believe in it, this approach will seem bizarre to you. Like, why would you let children get away with this? It will just seem bizarre. And you can't argue against it because it's a philosophical issue.
Well, what I found useful when talking to teachers or parents was to say, yes, but you do a lot of work in the backstage.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's a good answer.
Because that's where your work is, probably. It's a lot of work, but it's not seen in the situation.
Yes.
It seems like maybe
that's
whatever, but you.
That's a good response, and it's very much the relationship goes into all the work goes in someplace else that you don't see. It's hidden work, and then there's fruit for this, fruit that comes from it. Yes.
We know you're reluctant to give advice on how to parent, like to give strategies, techniques, and so on. But towards the end of the book, you do introduce 7 principles of natural discipline. Mm-hmm. But as you say, these are not strategies, they're not how-tos, and if I can quote, they're values to aim for, core ideas to return to when inevitable frustrations of parenting tempt us to adopt the self-defeating techniques of good old-fashioned discipline. Mm-hmm. So you actually do encourage parents to listen to their own intuition, and the rest should follow, as you already said. And yes, we find that this takes a lot of faith. So we're wondering, can you say this is your experience? And wouldn't you say that giving some kind of suggestions might help parents to feel more competent?
Yes, of course. And I try to do that as well. Despite my protest, I try to do this as well. The problem with receiving advice is that we lose the very place we must come from in ourselves to invite our children to depend upon us, and for our children to truly feel safe and cared for. It's this kind of alpha caring position that they must sense from us. So parents must have a strong, caring alpha presence for this to happen with their children. You can't get this strong alpha presence by following someone else's advice or someone else's direction. So you've got to reflect on it. You've got to think of it. You've got to find it inside of yourself someplace. It has to correspond with your own intuitions, and then and feel it from there. It's just like you can't dance with a textbook in hand, right? And the parent-child relationship is truly a dance. And you have to feel this dance from the inside out. You could study dancing academically, but that doesn't make it, that doesn't mean you can dance. You've got to feel it. And where you get this dance is more an issue of confidence than competence. It's not competence, it's confidence. And the confidence comes from believing in that oneself is one's child's best bet, is the answer to their attachment needs. It's not from seeking the right answers for what to do with our children, but from actually believing that we are the best answer. We have a wonderful confidence when we believe we are the answer to our partner. Probably no competence whatsoever, but wonderful confidence. Like if we believe we are our partner's best bet, oh my goodness, we tap something inside of ourselves. We tap an intuition. They're on our radar. We get a sense of them. Good things happen. Great things happen from this. And there's a chemistry in our relationship. Now, if this is true for us in the dance of marriage, how much more true would it be for the dance of parenting? So what I'm asking for individuals is just to step up and act as if you are your child's answer. And in finding this place that you present yourself confidently as that may be true, the rest will follow. It will follow. But acting, stepping up to the plate with confidence is really what is required. The competence will come over years. Like after 5 children and 6 grandchildren, I'd like to think I'm a little bit competent. After all these years of marriage, I would like to think of it. But still, even in marriage, it's when I lose the confidence that I am my partner's best bet, that I lose all the dance, and that is where the dance comes from, and that is so fulfilling as a parent. That makes it all worthwhile, and it starts with this with just simply being the answer, acting as if one is the answer rather than trying to find the right answers.
Yeah, so can I just have one more question? I think the last question, it has been on my mind a lot, because this book usually touches or at least shakes people. And some people recognize peer orientation in themselves as well as in their children. Some people feel the pangs of guilt while reading it, especially if you translate it sentence by sentence.
Yes.
So you're either feeling,
yeah, you can't skip any part, can you?
No.
You have to go every sentence. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yes.
So, and then you feel either you're not a good enough parent or that you already messed up your child, and then still others feel this approach takes a lot of hard work on themselves, especially, I guess. So what would be your message for all of us, all these readers?
Well, first of all, I'm deeply touched that others have been deeply touched. The issue of guilt was a huge issue. I couldn't find a way of writing such a book without it evoking some guilt. And I need the readers to know that it evoked guilt in me as well. I felt badly for my own peer orientation as an adolescent, for not taking care of my siblings as I would have. I was the oldest child, and if my friends hadn't been more important, I would have taken much better care of my younger siblings. I also felt badly for setting the stage for my oldest two children to become peer-oriented, and I talk about that in the book and the stories about that and having to win them back. And they suffered some significant wounds because of it, and including orphaning them. Orphaning, that's probably not a word, but from my own love for them, is that they didn't experience it. When writing the book, we had a focus group that helped us. Gabor and I would meet with what we call the Tuesday night group. And so we would discuss just how we were writing, and almost every single Tuesday night, the issue of guilt would come up. And is there a way of writing it, this book, that would not create some guilt? And so I thought a lot about it. Actually, I couldn't find a way, but what I would like to say is that guilt is simply a part of the territory of raising children. Mm-hmm. We can't both assume our parenting responsibilities and not feel guilty, as we will always fall short. Parenting perfectly is an impossibility. So it is more important to come to some kind of acceptance of living in the territory of guilt when one is a parent, when one is responsible for raising of children. The more we make friends with guilt, the more we can take up a relationship, believe it, not believe it, take up, disagree with it, not agree with it. But the less we run from it, and the less we run from it, the better. I think way too many people are running from this and want guilt-free parenting, and that means in the end irresponsible parenting. And so I would say, what I would say is we basically need to learn with the guilt that comes with the being a responsible parent, and take comfort in the fact that we don't need to parent perfectly for our children to realize their potential. It isn't all up to us. Nature is assuming the major role of the endeavor of raising our children, and we are in a position of midwife to that process. And so it's accepted.
Yeah. Thank you so much.